So let's begin. This week we're, at least in the triennial cycle, we are going to be continuing with what's commonly known as Parashat Yitro, and continues the description of how Am Yisrael made it to Har Sinai, and then we have the grand speech, the Decalogue. I wouldn't like to say the 10 Commandments only because there are many more than 10 commandments. I guess the 10 primary commandments, but even that's a little bit inaccurate. We already had the commandments involving the new moon, Passover, everything involving Passover. We've had Tefillin already. Even the Shabbos has been addressed already in this book. So it's kind of hard to say that they're the first 10. But either way, we could say it's perhaps the primary 10 that featured in the covenant, or as Chazal say in the Midrash, perhaps the primary 10 that allude to all the others. By the way, gentlemen, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to interrupt me in the middle. I actually like that because it keeps me on my toes. If I say something that doesn't quite make sense also, please do so. Now, there is this idea when they read the Torah in public that we're supposed to be standing for the 10 Commandments. That is a common Jewish practice. It's been around for at least 1,000 years. The Rambam addresses it. He was basically opposed to such a practice. He said that it's not right, or he wrote that it's not right to stand for certain parts of the Torah reading because it's a way of showing that perhaps certain parts of the Torah are more important than others. And that's not proper. The Torah is a whole. It was given by one God. The Torah is one. And there is no part of the Torah that is more important or more important than another. The problem is that in Maimonides' days, that's the Rambam, there was a prominent group, a sectarian group, the Karaites. Nowadays, they're just a novelty. There aren't that many Karaites around. But the Karaites were quite prominent where and when the Rambam was around. And the problem was that they basically ascribed prominence to the 10 Commandments, to the Decalogue, and other heretical sects over the ages, the Sadducees, the renegade Christians, and eventually the Christians themselves. By renegade, I mean the Jews who began Christianity, and the Christians themselves, I mean the major global union that is mostly Gentile and not Jewish. They basically say that perhaps the 10 Commandments are more important than the rest of the Torah, or that's the Ikar, as they would say. So the Rambam was familiar with this. Perhaps if there had been a practice with which the Rambam was familiar, for example, to stand during the Shirat Hayam, Az Yashir, or some other part of the Torah reading, perhaps he wouldn't have been so adamant about it. But either way, his point stands. We should not be standing because it reflects this idea that perhaps we are giving primacy to one section of the Torah. Now, there are some who defend the practice. They would say that just like Am Yisrael was standing at Mount Sinai, that's what they call it, Ma'amad Har Sinai, standing at Sinai, where a Ma'amad is an interesting word that doesn't translate so directly into English. A Ma'amad is a standing, an act, more than just an act of standing. It's a group standing, or it's a convocation. So perhaps that would be a justification for the common practice. I mean, I grew up, I saw this. People used to stand for the Decalogue. You read it 3 times a year. Twice we read with Yitro, at least when we were doing the 1-year cycle in Chutzlards, in February, and then again on Pentecost, the holiday of Shavuot. And then when we read the second version of the Decalogue, when Parashat Wa'ef Hanan rolls around in the summertime, right after Tisha B'Av. So they're reenacting Har Sinai. They still shouldn't do it because it still smacks of heresy. But that assumes that the local heresy standing for the 10 Commandments is, as I described, a movement that does ascribe more importance to the 10 Commandments. The problem is that for many people who live in the Western world, the new heretical sects or the new avant-garde heresies are less. It used to be in the olden days, the Karaites, the Sadducees, the Christians, they acknowledged the divinity of the Torah, except it's divine, except some parts are more important than others. Nowadays, you go in the Western world, the case has been, especially in Europe, in America that people just do not believe. Gentiles and unfortunately Jews deny the existence of any God. And of course, they deny the existence of any God's Torah. The heresy is there is no such thing as a divine Torah. And it's just any other piece of literature composed by an ancient culture. So in such places, standing for when the proper Jews read the Torah in public and they stand for the Decalogue, despite it not being approved by Maimonides, is not so bad, because in this case they're not doing like the local heretics. Bottom line is, I think you should do like the Rambam. You should not stand because it sends the wrong message, especially to the children. I always found it interesting. Standing during parts of the prayer also is certainly not necessary according to halacha. All sorts of practices have developed over the ages. Jews stand up in their prayers. I do not know why. We're going to talk about the Abu Darham sometime later. But he pointed out that there is a claim, for example, that one has to stand for the recitation of the Shalosh Esrei Midot. Nowadays, most Sephardic congregations say that every day as part of the regular Tachanun, sometimes twice a day. The 13 attributes of God's mercy, they preface their Tachanunim with the confession, the vidui, and then the recitation of the Shalosh Esrei Midot. In the olden days, it was reserved for fast days and the like, special occasions, and Slichot. Nowadays, Ashkenazim mostly know it from the Slichot time, but we have so much exposure here in Israel to these other practices, we probably hear it much more regularly. He already said that even though there are some Geonim who offered that such a thing should only be said with the minyan and some should stand, he already made the obvious point that it is not one of those things in the Talmudic list that is a davar shebik dusha, one of the matters that require a minyan. For the examples the Gemara gives are the recitation of the Kaddish and Kiddusha, reading the Torah, repetition of Shmon Esrei, Birkat Kohanim. Those are Devarim Shebik Dusha, matters of holiness, and they require a proper quorum of 10 men, 10 Jewish men. But the Shlosh Esrei Midot is not on that list. Further, even if you would say it's a Devar Shebik Dusha, who says you have to stand for it? We do not stand, for example, for the recitation of all Kaddishim. We do not stand for the reading of the Torah. So it's a little bit suspect that we would demand that people stand even for such a thing. There are all sorts of practices. The rule is, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. I remember davening at Syrian shuls in Brooklyn. It's radically different from that which I grew up with, but the trick is just follow along with them. But if we would have an ideal minyan, we would not press people to do such a thing. And I think it's very important nowadays so that children don't get the wrong message. We should not just be standing up when it's not necessary, because then they'll get the idea. And as you know, some people also stand up in the synagogues commonly for the recitation of the prayer for the state, the Hayalim, various other similar prayers that usually are inserted before the beginning of the Musaf on Shabbat and holidays. Really, it's unnecessary. The problem is people get very offended if you do not stand. So just be smart and be aware of what the halacha requires. Also, the announcement of Rosh Chodesh, they're going to do it this week. We're going to announce that Rosh Chodesh is going to be next week sometime, I think on Wednesday. I have to check. But be that as it may, yeah, I think if it's tonight, today was the 21st, so yes, it will be Thursday, Friday. I still have to check that one. The point is, don't offend anybody, but people should know the fact that they stand for the announcement of the upcoming Rosh Chodesh is certainly not demanded by halacha. And once again, the justification for the practice is because it's a form of reenactment. It reenacts that which was done when they would sanctify the month. They would stand up and do so in the Beit Din. So too we stand. Once again, to each his own, but we should be aware of the halacha. Now, the gentleman put out a nice, I guess, a nice reader for those who want to follow the triennial cycle. You see, it's Rabbi Bar-Hayim put it out, and also the gentlemen who were helping him do it, and it includes the Targum. And many have noticed that there are two sets of trop. That is, there's one way to read the Torah reading with the ordinary trop, which basically has the division of the psukim the way it's supposed to be. And then there's a special set of trop that we reserve for the reading of the Torah when we read these 10 commandments that change the structure. How does it change the structure? Now I got B'chodesh HaShlishi. So I wanted to see if they actually got the intricate part right. It says here, you can see on the 4th page, first they printed it just the Decalogue as it is, as it appears in the Torah, without any vowels, without any trop. And then it says, here's how you read it. Notice the Anochi is its own pasuk. And then the second commandment, Lo Yelecha Elohim Achrim Al Panai, and the pasuk ends at L'Shomrei Mitzvothai. Now, the reason for this new set of trop is that, as the Chafetz Chaim writes, it takes a number of psukim and unites them into one. And sometimes over here, the basic idea, as the Chafetz Chaim says, is that it turns multiple psukim into one, and sometimes we find one pasuk into many psukim. And the reason for this, according to the gentleman who put out the Tommy Torah, which is a wonderful newsletter. I think he stopped doing it, but he put it out for a few years. He kept adjusting it on every Torah reading, public Torah reading, and all the Mechilot, and some of the Haftarot. He explains why it is that we have certain trop. Every single dot, every nikudah is analyzed there. Okay, so he basically says the reason for this was that
Hold on, I'll try to
in
do
the
it.
olden days, most of us are not familiar with the standard practice as it was to read the translation, read the Targum along with the Torah reading. That was demanded by the halacha. Like the rabbi said, it's the question, why don't we do that anymore? That's why he put together a new modern Hebrew translation of Onkelos so that people would understand it. But they still do this in many Yemenite congregations. Okay, whose is this? Did I share this or someone else did? Okay, so if you scroll down a little bit, now we're seeing Eliyahu's screen. If you scroll down a little bit, you see that, for example, over there, right there, Kaberet Avicha V'Yatimecha, that's one pasuk. But then the pasuk that's over here, Lo Tirsach, Lo Tinaf, Lo Tignov, Lo Ta'anev Re'acha Et Shaker, that was all one verse. It's now been divided into 4 shorter verses. Like the Yemenites still do, normally the one who reads the Targum after the reader of the Torah finishes a pasuk. How does the reader of the Torah finish? How does he make it known that he's finished the pasuk? Because we're all familiar with the special tune that denotes that a pasuk is over. It's commonly called the sof pasuk in Ashkenazic circles, but the more correct name of the trop is a siluk. Siluk means, okay, we're done. So that's supposed to be the cue for the Targum reader. The Targum reader stands next to the one with the Torah scroll, and when he pauses, the Targum reader reads from his Targum book. So he would say, Asher Hashem Elokecha nothein lach, or he lanes it, nothein lach, siluk, and then the Targum reader knows to read the Torah. No, you could leave it on that page. You could leave it on that page. That's what he was supposed to do, and then he reads it. So by adding silukim at lo tirtzach and lo tinaf, the Targum reader knows to read the Targum at that point. And on the other hand, if you go back, let's say, to the earlier commandments, because we don't want to interrupt the reading of a particular commandment with this Targum, for example, you see that the second commandment is quite long, or the commandment for the 4th one, for the Sabbath, is quite long, so that the Targum reader knows to only read the whole Targum after the whole commandment. We have eliminated the silukim that were present. We've eliminated the division between the psukim. The problem with with this Ta'am Elyon, as it's called, the upper set of trop, because most of those types of tropes that it uses are above the words and above the words instead of below the words. Same thing with Hebrew vowels. Most Hebrew vowels are indicated below the words, at least in our Masoretic Tiberian system. They're indicated below the words, but many are indicated above. For example, the Chulam, notable exception. So this is called Ta'am Elyon because mostly the type of tropes that are indicated above the word. The problem is that if you know the rules of trop, which is beyond the scope of what we're talking about now, it doesn't do the trick. It actually makes the sentences sort of not understandable. And I've always wondered about that. it doesn't. It seems to be a later innovation, and it doesn't really fit the rules we have that we know ourselves. Now, that's enough for the Tam Elyon and the Tam Tachton. It actually results in some interesting phenomena. No, if you leave it there, back up again to the fourth, right there. So you'll probably notice that words like these actually change. Take the word tirtzach. In the Tam Tachton, it's only a part of one pasuk. It's only a quarter of the pasuk. So it's lo tirsach, lo tinaf, lo tichnov, lo ta'anev re'acha eshacher. That's the way it would be read as one verse. And in that case, lo tirtzach would have no dot in the tuf, and the proper vowelization under the sadi should be a patach, lo tirsach, simple patach. But because now it's its own verse, and it's basically a two-word verse, and there's a break between the words lo and tirtzach, what there should be here is now a dagesh kal in the tav. So it should be lo tir sah. And because we're ending a pasuk here, the accented syllable has a patach. Normally, the rule is with trop that when the word with the accented syllable is the siluk or the ethnah, then the patach is promoted to a kamas. And that is a rule that's a part of ancient Hebrew rule to indicate that there's more of a stop there. Similarly, all of these conjunctive tropes between lo tirsach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, and lo ta'aneh, in the Tam Tachton, they're all connective. And that would necessitate dropping the dagesh kal from the prefix tav in all of those words. And the tav should be weak. It's the th sound, lo thirsach, lo thinaf, lo ta'aneh. It's connective. But when you read in the Tam Elyon, they're all disconnected. The lo is always disconnected. So the grammatical rule that necessitates losing the dagesh kal is removed from all of these, is put back in all of these words. So you have lo tirtzach, lo tinaf, lo tignov, and lo thanev re'acha shacher stays the same because that's hyphenated anyways. That's the grammatical part. And now if you could stop sharing the screen, we'll go on with this. It's very important. These are the types of differences in pronunciation that have very little actual consequence. And therefore, if someone makes a mistake in reading it, it's not the type of thing he should be corrected for. Remember, when we correct someone reading the Torah, we also have to consider people's dignity. Embarrassing people is a terrible sin, whereas someone reading the thaf as a taf or the tav as a thaf almost never really has an effect on the meaning of the word. Yes, there are exceptions, but most of the time it's not. As a matter of fact, most of our Jewish brethren get away with never making the distinction ever, or never even knowing about the distinction. They just read all of the tavs as a tav, a strong one with a strong T sound, as opposed to the fricative TH sound. And as you know, also large parts of what's generally called the Ashkenazi community, although most of them have never set foot anywhere near Ashkenaz, they even read it as an S, which is, I think, indefensible. But what are you going to do? They keep doing it. So we shouldn't be embarrassing anybody. This is the Bar Mitzvah Boy rule. I consider most Torah readers, except for some personal acquaintances who are very good, to be Bar Mitzvah boys. Even if they're 60 years old, they're Bar Mitzvah boys, so we do not correct them because that's not nice. And if they ask about it and they want to know, then they should. Then they should be told what exactly is going on. They themselves should take some time. There's no way that one could properly fulfill, for example, the commandment to say Shema twice a day without being aware of these intricate grammatical rules. You see that something similar to lo tirtzach, the patach becoming kamatz, is also present in the last word in that pasuk, shaker. The word is sheker with the segol, but the rule is if it ends the sentence, so the segol graduates to kamatz. Are there any questions at this point? I thought I heard some.
Yeah. If the Rav wants to talk to me for 5 minutes at the end of the shiur, I'll make any of these grammatical corrections on the sheet because I wasn't aware of them and Rav Bar-Hayim didn't correct them. So
okay.
So we'll just spend 5 minutes after the shiur, and then you'll tell me what to fix, and I'll fix it.
Okay.
Not believe it tonight. Thank you.
Fine. So let's move on to the next topic. There's the middle commandment. There is kabedeth avicha ve'achimecha. So the old English translation is honor. The Gemara discusses this commandment. Kabed is an imperative form. The the gerund would be kibbutz, and a dot is in the bet. Now, there are certain halachic treatises that deal with kibbud of wa'im, which means the honor or the reverence due to one's father and mother. We also have an idea of kibbud Shabbat. And in many of the books, the word was written kaf bet vav dalit, which is the proper spelling, by the way. Even though it's pronounced kibbud with a chirik under the kaf, that's a chirik katan. It's it's less e and more like the short I sound in English, like many other Hebrew words of that mishkal. For example, chinuch is not chinuch, it's heinuch, and there's a dot in the nun because you're supposed to pronounce the chirik as like a short chirik, as in lifnei. You don't say lifnei, you say lifnei, as it's so it would be chinuch or tefillah. There's a dot in the lamed in that case. Now, because they were writing this properly in the books, for example, the unpointed Mishnah Torah, people have confused this. They think that there's an idea of kavod Shabbat. It would be the word kavod with a kamatz and no dot in the bet. And in the smichut form, the construct state, it would be the honor of the Sabbath. And they pronounce that as kavod Shabbat. That's incorrect. It should be kibbutz Shabbat. And in the proper pointed editions of the Rambam, for example, the Machon Mamre and the Steinsaltz, I'm a big fan of both of them, and the Makbili. You can't study Torah without all three of those editions at your side. They all now vowelize the word properly. It should be kibbutz. And the same thing with Shabbat. And also, it's not oneg Shabbat necessarily. They've also pointed out that the vav is after the nun, and it's inuch Shabbat. Inuch Shabbat, again, with the dagesh in the nun and the chirik katan under the ayin. And you should then learn to pronounce your ayins properly, so it would come out ainuch. And as you know, the gimel without a dot is the r sound, which has also been lost. So just learning how to pronounce ainuch Shabbat is already college level Hebrew. That's going to get you a few stares, but it's the proper way, and that's the way it's been done there. Now, this commandment to honor parents is actually kind of interesting. It's actually connected to a number of other commandments. It's not just kabed avicha ve'achimecha. By the way, there's no direct or explicit commandment to do so for the Sabbath, as Maimonides points out. It's actually just shamor and zachor, and Chazal learned about kibbud and inuch from those two. There, he puts this as positive commandment number 209, and he points out that there's something interesting. We have a few commandments involving parents. I'll read them in the list. First is kibbud avaim, shelo kalel avaim. One is not allowed to curse his father or mother. Shelo koth avaim. One is not allowed to strike his father or mother. Kibbud avaim and lir'ah me avaim. He has to fear them. The Gemara points out that our English translations are sort of off. Rav Schechter likes to point this one out, that normally what's called honoring the parents is actually serving one's parents. They give examples of one should bring his parents drinks and other acts of service. That's what kibbud involves, positive acts of service. Whereas morah, which is once again the gerund form of the commandment to fear one's parents, tira'u, or lir'a avim, and tira'u is you shall fear. You is the plural form, not thou shalt. It means use. It means, it's called morah, mem vav resh aleph. The vav is part of the shorish in that case. And all of these commandments, or at least the halachic consequences of these commandments, involve parents. And then we see that they also involve teachers of Torah, and even more specifically, one's own personal teacher of Torah. So the Gemara, in a long sugya, that's a long discussion around page 30 and the ensuing pages in Kiddushin, and that's in the first chapter already. It's quite a long chapter. And in the equivalent Yerushalmi chapter, you find all of these halachot, and there's actually quite a discussion how there's so much parallelism between the commandments to honor and revere the parents and to serve them, and to do so again for teachers of the Torah, and more specifically, one's own teacher of the Torah. The problem is that we don't find all these explicit commandments regarding teachers of the Torah in the Torah. It's assumed by the sages. And Maimonides was sensitive to this one. There's only one explicit source about reverence that one should have for the sages. Does anybody know where it is? You could guess. This is a good question for the kids, by the way, at the Shabbos table. Kibud of Aim is in the Decalogue. Kibud of the sages is actually only 2 words in the Torah. No, it's Hadar Tapnez. Okay, 3 words. It says Mipnei Seva Takum, rise before the aged. V'Hadarta Pnei Zakein, and give respect. Hadarta in that case it means give respect. The in front of, before, is it literally, or Pnei sometimes means literally one's face, Zakein. And Seva was referring to someone who's actually old. Zakein sometimes mean someone who's old, but as the sages say, Zikna also means one who is acquired wisdom. Some people get to an old age and they still they never learned any lessons, they have nothing to teach anybody. And some people acquire Zikna, sagacity. Am I pronouncing it right? I don't know. The problem is with pronouncing words is that if you if you learn it from reading, you never heard someone say the word, you're not going to know how to pronounce it yourself. That's always the indication. What was that?
I believe that's correct. Yes, sagacity.
Okay, thank you. So the problem is that some get it earlier, some get it later, some never get it, some have it already from a young age. So he says that this is the only source, yet we apply all of the halachot that are consequences of these many mitzvot that apply to parents. They're also applied to the teachers of the Torah. And he says, I'm going to read from the Rambam, Ferush Amaru, and they said explicitly, he's talking about the sages, Mora Rabacha Kimura Shemayim. Your fear of your master, means master in Torah, should be like your fear of heaven. We learn all of this from that which we found, that the scripture commanded us to revere the sages, the chachamim, and the parents, as it has been explained in the language of the Talmud. He's referring to, once again, this end of chapter 1 in Kiddushin. Lo shei mitzvah b'fnei atzma, v'havein zof, but it's not its own specific commandment or explicit commandment. And understand this. He's pointing this one out. Even the sages were able to derive from one single commandment, one short commandment, that the fear of heaven and the fear of parents, which is all explicit, by the way. It also says you have to fear God. You can't hit God because he's non-physical. You cannot curse God. And basically, aside from not hitting the parents, everything that we know about reverence of God, we've been told also explicitly about parents. So too, you have to have toward your the sages and your rabbacha, your teacher of Torah. This is something, by the way, that's sorely lacking in the Western world. One of the biggest surprises I had joining the Israeli school system was how they refer to parents. Teachers are addressed by their first name. And something even more surprising, in American yeshivas, we refer to everybody as Rabbi, or Rabbi, last name. And here in Israel, if they call you Rabbi, they might call you Rav, and then they'll say your first name, which is quite surprising. In high school, they were doing this, or they just call you by first name. I remember when I started taking some courses here at a graduate school, I referred to my professor as Professor Plonievich, and they looked at me like I was a little bit off. They said, no, refer to him as Yossi. And I could not get used to that for a year and a half because it is so disrespectful. Similarly, the first time I was in court here in Israel, a secular court, unfortunately, I remember when the judge walked in and I stood up properly like an American is supposed to do. And she looked at me and said, what are you, an American? Sit down. So yes, certain aspects of respect are sorely lacking, but we should educate the younger people that it's not proper. You should not be referring to any teacher by their first name. They should always be addressed by their title. and by their last name. And also, we should teach our children. My father was very insistent on this one. There are even any adult, any colleague of your parents is referred to at least as Mr. or Mrs. and last name. We do not, and I also highly recommend that when speaking to anybody's wife, your friends' wives, you should not have so much familiarity with them. You should always address them as Mrs. Mrs. Your friend's last name, or Mrs. your friend's first name. You could refer to someone as, for example, Mr. Shimon, Mrs. Shimon. That's proper. It keeps the proper distance, and it's also respectful. And Kal v'chomer, Rabbanim should be addressed with their proper title. Certainly, someone who has doctorates, people who have actually learned things. There's quite a few Jewish people who are Talmidei Chachamim. They just don't have they don't go by rabbi, yet they are quite learned. They should also be addressed respectfully. That's just basic mussar there. So you'll find, and this is just an introduction to a broader topic that we'll have to get into sometime later, and that is the idea of mehila. It's not forgiveness necessarily. It's more like wavering. There's a concept already addressed in the Talmud there about how the master, the teacher of the Torah, can waive his right to respect, or he can forego the respect due to him. So too, we have this concept that parents may do so. And the halacha, at least in the classic sources, indicates that parents can certainly do so. Parents can forego the respect due to them. And to a certain extent, teachers may do so also. Now, the question is, when we hear such a thing, the Talmudic statement is very, very short. It says, Ha'av shemachal kvodo, kivodo machul. A father, and by the way, when it says father, it means or a mother, who forgoes his kavod, the respect due to him, or maybe perhaps it should be in this case, I think at least kibudo, the reverence due to him. So it's possible he may do so. So what nafkamina is that? What's the practical ramification of such a thing? So there are some people who are thinking, well, I'm not supposed to sit in my father's chair, so if he lets me, I can go sit in his chair. I'm not supposed to refer to my father by name. That's pretty bad. But if he lets me, I can do so. Or any other deferential treatment, or perhaps even the prohibitions. We're not allowed to strike our parents, and they even say medical treatment. Person is a surgeon, unless it's to save his parents' lives and there's no one else to do it. He's not supposed to be even causing his parents to bleed. But let's say he's a good dermatologist, and he needs to treat his father's skin condition. It'll result in his father shedding a little blood. He's not supposed to do that. Can we say that, well, he's a dermatologist and his father is foregoing his fatherly privilege, so this son may do so? And also, to what extent does this mean that the students can, avoid or not give the proper respect or whatever service, etc., that they are due to their Rebbe? To what extent is it? What are the practical ramifications? And I think this is grossly misunderstood. I think it's actually highly limited. I'm not where I'm supposed to be. I wanted to actually bring out the Shulchan Aruch. I just left it inside because of the situation. So I'll tell you some of this by memory. But first, the Rambam explains, what does it mean to respect, and to what extent, what does it mean when we have this mehila, the foregoing of the father? So the first one is in the 5th parak there of Talmud Torah, right at the beginning. The first halacha, it says, Kashem she'adam mitzuveh b'kibud aviv. Just like a person is commanded concerning reverence for his father, uvirato, and also to fear him, kachu hayav b'chibud rabo. So too, he's obligated in holding his master in reverence, and also yirato, the fear there too. V'rabo yeter me'aviv, and his master even more than his father. She'aviv hevio l'chayo hazeh. His father brought him to the life of this world. His father, of course, begat him. V'rabo shelimedo chochma. His master teaches him wisdom, the wisdom of the Torah. Hevio l'chayo olam haba, brings him into the life of the next world. That's a quote from our sages. And then a few halachot later, it's really according to these more updated versions. Oh wow, you just put it there. Yeah, I was reading it there. I had it on my screen also, so you're showing to everybody. and this one has the dots. You go down to what's the supposed to be the 16th or the 11th halacha, 16th according to Machon Mamre. Just stop it right there. I can't read it because all the pictures are very buddy in the way. So let me try hiding it. There it says Harava muvhak sheratzalim chol al kvodo b'chol advrim ha'elu. It says Rava muvhak. That means his primary teacher of Torah, who wants to forego all these things. The previous all the halachot describe the reverential treatment one has to have toward his master, that as he described, o be'achad mehen, or just one of these aspects, l'chol tamidav, and he forgives all his students, o le'achad mehem, or any of them, harashuth biyado, he may do so. V'afal pi shemachal, chayav al tamid l'hadro, v'afilu b'shah shemachal. Even though the master has forgone this treatment, they still have to give it to him. They still have to respect him in this way, even when, v'sha'av, filu b'shah means right after he forgave them. So what does that mean? I thought you just said he can forgo his respect, but they still have to give it to him. So what does that mean? The Shulchan Aruch, if you open up a classic edition of the Shulchan Aruch, actually sheds some light on this. But first, we should see what the Rambam says regarding kibud avaim. Similarly, it's in the Hilchot Mamrim, and he says that it only means when it says a father is machal kvodo, it means that he should not insist so much that his children give him all that respect. It doesn't say anything about Yirah. By the way, with regards to fearing parents, which is basically like Rav Shechter says, and quoting the Gemara, it means respect. All the manners in which we act toward our parents that show respect, Yirah, the Gemara never entertains that those can be waived. Instead, the only thing that can be waived is the service due to the parents, the kibud aspect. And when it says waived, the Rambam says that it means he should not be midakdek so much with his children. It means he shouldn't be so insistent because it's going to be a hassle on them and they might come to do the wrong thing. They will feel annoyed at their father. The Gemara entertains, if you have a father who's really testing his parents, testing his children, for example, the classic case, to what extent does someone have to respect his parents and tolerate them, even if they start throwing his wallet into the sea? So the sages point out that parents shouldn't do such extreme things because most normal children might react, and they might react in anger, and that would be a sin on their part. In essence, the parent is bringing the child towards sinning. And it also says a parent should not discipline his children. What? Yeah, it's a lifnei iver means placing a stumbling block before the blind. It's a figurative expression. It's a figurative mitzvah, meaning don't mislead people into sinning. So the sages said a person should not strike disciplinary action, that is, his already older children, because that just makes them worse. It's okay, by the way, to give a little potch to a child who is old enough to understand the discipline. It actually works. If you spare the rod, you're going to spoil the child. But eventually, children who are big enough should not be disciplined that way. Yes, it's very important for parents to make sure that their children are disciplined. There's no other way. Otherwise, they could grow up to be antisocial and not respecting of their elders, and it just breaks down the whole system. So a person should have moderation and not do so much. That's the way the Rambam understands it, and the Vilna Gaon points this one out. The Shulchan Aruch quotes this. That's all it means, but it doesn't say, for example, that, oh, my dad now lets me sit in his chair. My dad allows me to be more friendly to him. Even acting toward one's parents, and I'm certainly, I wish I was an example of the proper behavior one has to exhibit toward his parents. I pray that at least now, thank God I've had, since I'm more mature now, I've had more opportunities to try to make up for all the disrespect I showed my parents in years past. And I pray to God that it will be continued to allow this opportunity. But also, I don't live near my parents, so I don't have that many opportunities. But it's something that I pray for. We cannot just suddenly decide that all these halachot, and we should study all of them in depth. We should read the Gemara, we should read the Ram, we should read the Shulchan Aruch. I wish we could just have time to go through all of them together. They don't get there. They are still in force. And then you read the Pethai Teshuvah. You also see what Rabbi Akiva points out in the name of the Ridbaz. The Ridbaz was a contemporary of the Shulchan Aruch. He was a major posek in Egypt. And he points out that this whole concept of a Rav Shemachal Kvodo, Kvodo Machul, the Av Machal Kvodo, Kvodo Machul, father can forego his kibud, the respect and reverence due to him, just means that the child is not punished in the heavenly court for this disrespect of his father. The father can forgive this child. It means he's not foregoing his respect that's due to him in practice. It means that if the child did something wrong, then they are not going to hold it against the child. The child is forgiven. And that's important because it doesn't permit anything before the fact. And that leads us back to this Rambam where he says, once again, concerning the master forgives, but the Talmid, the student, is still completely obligated. It just means that the master forgave, or he forgave his own reverence, so his Talmidim are not punished. This is an important basic idea regarding this, because God willing, next time we'll talk about this when the opportunity presents itself. You're going to have to make sure that I do continue with this topic. There is, unfortunately, I wouldn't say perhaps not unfortunately, but there are some who have sought to extend this Talmudic concept that is extremely limited in scope and try to extend it and allow for basically children to do things which, at least according to in the Rambam's understanding and perhaps even the Shulchan Aruch's understanding, are not defensible. So that's it for now. I'm sorry we started late. I don't know what happened. We'll take questions if there is any. And I'd like to remind everybody, don't forget, like, share, subscribe. Keep the questions coming. This has been very exciting. Any questions there?
You can feel free to make up for the time lost.
Okay, but I can't.
Oh, okay.
There's also Ma'ariv. We have to do our mitzvot. So if there's no questions, I guess.
Well, no, I just wanted to mention that, or maybe I should ask: is it not true that the same pasuk, "Sevat Takum," that's used as a basis for respecting Chachamim, is also at the same time used as a source for just respecting elderly people in general? Is that true, according to at least some opinions?
It's true because it's derech eretz. Mipnei sevat takum. If you have to stand up for them, then of course you should be giving them more respect. But there's no specific commandments and halachic discussion there regarding just old people. That they didn't recognize that. There's just the general idea that one should have respect. By the way, some people think that mipnei sevat takum is referring to get up and give them your chair.
Well, that's what Egged does on the buses, actually.
Yeah, so they take that literally. Mipnei sevat takum is you stand up out of respect for the old person, even if he has a whole couch to sit on, and you're sitting on a wooden plank. You have to stand up. So the fact that we stand up and offer the old person our seat, that I would say is the fifth order of Shulchan Aruch. Derech eretz kadma l'Torah. Proper behavior comes before Torah study, and the Rambam also says this here. He talks about Moreh Rabbecha. He says you can't sit down the student in the yeshiva, in the cheder, until at least he has basic midos. Remember, the point of all our Torah study, tell the kids, can be summed up in 3 words: midos, midos, midos. So yeah, proper respect of the elders is part of that, and the respect in all these halachot that we are obligated to show to the parents and the Rabbeim, the Rabbecha, the teachers of the Torah, the Chachamim, that is beyond basic derech eretz. But of course, some people would say that no, a lot of the aspects of kibud, of la'im, is derech eretz. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap. Speak to your father about that. I highly recommend, like I said, study your midos and also read through these halachot. They're in the Talmud Torah and the Rambam, and in the Hilchot Mamrim, toward at the end. Interesting how he made that division. And in the Shulchan Aruch also, in Yoreh Deah, in the 240s. Any other questions?
Yeah, if the Rav will permit me 90 seconds.
Yes.
It's my understanding that, in fact, originally, when what we now read as Kriyat Shema was originally Kriyat Mikra and actually began with the Decalogue.
Yes.
And then the same problem happened 2,000 years ago as well, or 2,100, 2,200 years ago. And Chazal then actually took away the reading of that at that time to prevent the whole issue with the Tzadokim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, the Rav gave a shir about that a few months ago. It's
I have a
very
question.
interesting how these things change. It's there's a general rule. If something is being done by the sectarians, then we specifically should not do it. Rav Schechter, as I pointed out, said that from an objective halachic standpoint, women may wear tefillin, just like women can opt to hear the sounding of the shofar and sit in the sukkah, so they could wear tefillin. There's no halachic issue with that. Even a Gentile can, as we said. But he said that they shouldn't do so because where he lives in Manhattan, nowadays the shtick of the various reform movements is that women are just as obligated as men, if they even believe in that, in the commandments. That women wearing the Torah is out of some sort of feminist notions and not out of the pure motivation to keep God's Torah. So that's a problem. So even the Orthodox who are faithful to the Torah should not do so because it smacks of what they are doing. And I think that, of course, if you, let's say, live where I live, where such things don't exist, then it would be. But then again, most women don't sit around thinking, hey, I want to wear tefillin. Yep. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah. There are people who, where I live, when someone comes, they just like, they stand up just a little bit, not fully, and then just immediately sit down again. Is that the correct practice, or one should fully stand up in a few seconds? Or how
So
one
the
should do
standing, they talk about standing for the Sefer Torah, and that's as long as it's in motion. Sefer Torah don't move. Someone has to be carrying the Sefer Torah. So as long as someone's walking with it, and then when he gets to where he is, that's when you could sit. For the Rabbi, you're supposed to stand up when he's walking in, and until he tells everybody to sit down, basically. So it's within reason. If he takes a seat, so everybody could sit, and if he already tells everybody be seated, so too he could be. He should sit. This has its precedent, by the way, in the proper respect that the Kohen Gadol and the king show to each other. You're familiar with the halachot. There's all sorts of halachot that apply specifically to each of those esteemed gentlemen in Jewish society. So it says that the Kohen Gadol comes into a private audience with the king, so the king is supposed to stand, and the Kohen Gadol is supposed to give him the honor and then say, no, please be seated. And so too, that's what ideally what the Rabbeim should do. They should tell everybody to sit as soon as they can, so as not, as Chazal said, lahatriach, to be a burden on them. So once the Rebbe basically gets to his place, that's when you could sit down.
What about an old man?
Well, what'd you say?
An old man? What about an old man?
So the old man is as he's walking past, or when he enters the room. Once again, within reason. If you see an old man coming down the block, you're at the bus stop, you're sitting at the bench, and he's a block away, but now you see him. It's going to take him a good minute to walk on over, but you see him and he sees you and he knows you're there. You don't have to stand up at that point. It's only when he's perhaps the Arba Amoth within a reasonable distance.
And
also
one more
when he's walking by.
There are like here, they only stand up for the rabbi of the place, but there are many rabbanim who may come here, and especially me, I don't know much, but there are many people who know more than me that come in. Should I do what they do or no?
So you can stand up if people are not showing the proper respect. They only stand up for the rabbi. So perhaps that's okay. Maybe once again you can hope that the other rabbanim have also forgiven this, so it's not so bad that they don't stand. Perhaps they should stand. I know I've seen from our local Rav stands up when he has a lot of deference for. He has quite a few people attend his synagogue who themselves are quite learned. Some secret tzaddikim also. So he stands up for them, and that's a good thing. If you think that someone has, or you know that someone has acquired Torah wisdom, so you should stand up for them. You yourself should, and if others aren't, perhaps you should, hope that eventually they'll become familiar with the halachot and do so. Yeah. Like I said, you can't start correcting people. Remember, if you start telling people, hey, you should stand up, and you didn't stand up, that might be worse than what they did wrong. What they did, their neglect of this mitzvah is not as bad as, let's say, making people feel bad about that. We should always, like we brought ourselves back to being, we should always be considerate of people's feelings. Correcting people is really difficult to do in any time and place.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so I guess that's it. I thank Reb and Yamin for helping arrange this, and we'll pick up more on this idea of Kibbud Av V'Aim, God willing, in a future time.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org. If you are inspired by Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to get involved in Torah Eretz Yisrael activities in your local area, please fill out the relevant form by going to the link which appears on the screen.